In the sun-warmed hills of Villa Carlos Paz, Argentina, life moved at an easy pace. Children played in the narrow streets, families gathered in the evenings to share meals and laughter, and the scent of orange blossoms drifted on the breeze. Among the familiar faces in town was a man named Miguel Guzman. He was an honest, hard-working man, known for his kind smile and his love for simple things. A warm evening breeze, the laughter of his son Damien, and his loyal companion, a young German shepherd named Capitán. Miguel had never considered himself an especially sentimental person, but something about Capitán had captured his heart from the very beginning. He had bought the little puppy as a surprise for his son's 12th birthday. He remembered the day clearly, the look of astonishment on Damien's face, the excited barking of the puppy as he wiggled in Miguel's arms. From that moment, Capitán wasn't just a pet. He was family. Capitán grew quickly, as shepherds do. His ears perked sharply, his coat shone a rich blend of tan and black, and his eyes sparkled with energy and devotion. Wherever Miguel went, Capitán was close behind. Whether it was trips to the market, walks to the riverside, or lazy afternoons under the shade of their backyard tree, Miguel and Capitán were inseparable. At night, Capitán would curl up by Miguel's feet as he read the newspaper or listened to the radio. In the mornings, Capitán's excited barking was the family's wake-up call, urging everyone to greet the day with enthusiasm. Neighbors often joked that Capitán seemed less like a dog and more like Miguel's shadow, and Miguel, for his part, would only smile and scratch behind Capitán's ears, whispering softly, "That's right, my boy. You and me, always." But life, as it does, carries moments of quiet joy and moments of unexpected sorrow. One late autumn, Miguel began to feel unwell. What started as simple fatigue soon grew into something far more serious. Doctors delivered the grim news. Miguel was suffering from a severe illness, one that offered little hope of recovery. The family was devastated. Damien, now a young man, did his best to stay strong for his mother and father. Capitán, sensing the tension in the house, stayed even closer to Miguel, resting his head on his master's lap as if to share in the weight of his pain. Even during hospital visits, when the family returned home without Miguel, Capitán would sit by the door, waiting patiently for his owner's return. He didn't understand the quiet conversations behind closed doors. He didn't understand the tears, but he understood that something was wrong. The day of Miguel's passing was overcast, the sky heavy with clouds as if the world itself was mourning. Friends and family gathered at the small cemetery just outside of town to say their final goodbyes. Capitán, held on a leash by a family friend, whimpered and tugged toward the grave as the coffin was lowered into the earth. His brown eyes were wide with confusion, his body trembling. He watched as Miguel disappeared beneath the soil, his nose twitching as if he could still catch his scent on the breeze. That night, Capitán lay by the front door of the house, ears flicking at every sound, waiting for the familiar footsteps that would never return. And as the days passed, his wait did not end. At first, the family tried to comfort him. They gave him extra treats. They called to him with gentle voices. They tried to draw him away from the door. But Capitán's heart was heavy with longing. He paced the yard restlessly, sniffing at the air, whining softly at the empty spaces where Miguel had once stood. Then, one day, Capitán was gone. The Guzman family searched everywhere. They walked the streets of Villa Carlos Paz, calling his name until their voices grew hoarse. They posted notices, asked neighbors, checked the animal shelters. Days turned to weeks. There was no sign of Capitán. Damien feared the worst. Perhaps Capitán, lost in grief, had wandered too far, or suffered an accident in the wilderness beyond the town. The family mourned not only for Miguel, but now also for the dog who had shared in their loss. What they didn't know was that Capitán's journey had only just begun. Several weeks later, something remarkable happened. Miguel's widow, Veronica, visited the cemetery to lay fresh flowers at her husband's grave. As she approached, her breath caught in her throat. There, curled at the foot of the gravestone, was Capitán. His head lifted at the sound of her footsteps, ears flicking forward. His coat was dusty from the earth, his eyes tired but alert. Veronica's heart swelled with a mix of sorrow and wonder. She hurried to him, dropping to her knees and wrapping her arms around his familiar frame. "How did you get here, boy?" she whispered, tears filling her eyes. No one had brought Capitán to the cemetery. No one had shown him the way. Yet, somehow, he had found his master's resting place. Across town, beyond streets and houses, through a maze of unfamiliar scents. Somehow, love had led him there. The cemetery workers explained they had seen the dog arrive weeks earlier. At first, they tried to shoo him away, thinking he was a stray. But no matter how many times they chased him off, Capitán always returned. Every night, like clockwork, he settled beside Miguel's grave, curling into a tight ball against the chill of the evening air. During the day, he sometimes wandered the cemetery or even roamed the nearby streets, but by sunset, he was always back, standing guard. "He sleeps here every night," one of the workers told Veronica softly. "We've never seen anything like it." Veronica tried to coax Capitán home. She brought his favorite treats, called to him with all the affection of their years together. But Capitán would not leave. His loyalty was unshakable. He accepted her caresses, nuzzled into her touch, but as dusk approached, he gently pulled away and returned to his vigil beside the grave. The family, seeing the depth of Capitán's devotion, made peace with his choice. They brought him food and water, ensuring he was cared for. The cemetery staff, too, grew fond of their four-legged guardian. They built him a small shelter near the grave to shield him from rain and cold winds. They brushed the dust from his fur. They spoke to him as they tended to the grounds, as if he were a fellow caretaker of the dead. As the seasons turned, Capitán remained. Through summer's heat and winter's chill, through the blooms of spring and the falling leaves of autumn, he kept his silent vigil. Visitors to the cemetery began to notice him. Word of the loyal dog spread through Villa Carlos Paz and beyond. Journalists arrived to photograph Capitán, to tell his story to the world. People from distant towns traveled to see the dog who had chosen to guard his master even in death. To many, Capitán became more than just a pet. He was a symbol of undying love, of loyalty that knew no end, of a bond that even death could not sever. The seasons changed in Villa Carlos Paz, but Capitán's routine never did. Morning sunlight filtered through the cypress trees lining the cemetery paths, casting long, dappled shadows over the quiet grounds. Birds chirped from their perches, and the breeze stirred fallen leaves, but through it all, Capitán remained, a steadfast presence beneath the sky. Every morning, cemetery caretaker Hugo Martinez found Capitán resting at his usual place, beside Miguel's grave. Hugo had worked at the cemetery for years, but never had he seen such devotion. The dog's loyalty touched him deeply. "He came here on his own," Hugo told anyone who asked, "and he refuses to leave. This is where he belongs." At first, Hugo and the other workers thought Capitán might eventually move on. They had seen strays come and go, dogs that wandered in from nearby neighborhoods in search of food or shelter. But Capitán was different. He wasn't searching for a place to stay. He had already found it. With quiet reverence, he had claimed the foot of Miguel's grave as his home. When Hugo offered him scraps of food, Capitán accepted gratefully, but never followed him away from the grave. When thunderstorms rumbled overhead and rain lashed the earth, Capitán sought brief shelter beneath a nearby awning, but always returned the moment the skies cleared. It was as if an invisible thread bound him to this one place, woven from memory and love. Word of the devoted dog spread quickly through the town. Neighbors began visiting the cemetery, not just to pay respects to loved ones, but to catch a glimpse of Capitán. Children brought him treats and gently stroked his fur. Elderly visitors, leaning on canes, spoke to him softly as if he were an old friend. "Such loyalty," they would murmur, their voices thick with emotion. "If only all of us could love so deeply." The Guzman family continued to visit as well. Veronica came with Damien, who by now had grown into a man. They marveled at Capitán's unwavering presence, and though it pained them to see him endure harsh weather and lonely nights, they understood, as perhaps only they could, that Capitán's heart could not be persuaded. This was his mission. This was his vigil. As the months turned into years, Capitán's fame reached far beyond the borders of Villa Carlos Paz. Local newspapers first picked up the story, publishing photographs of the loyal dog curled faithfully beside Miguel's grave. Soon, national outlets took notice. Reporters from Buenos Aires traveled to the small town to document the remarkable tale. Captivated by the dog's unwavering dedication, they interviewed the Guzman family, cemetery workers, and anyone who had witnessed Capitán's vigil. One photograph, in particular, captured hearts across Argentina. It showed Capitán, his fur dusted with morning frost, lying beneath the pale glow of dawn, eyes half closed but alert, as if still watching over his master. The image spread like wildfire. Soon, Capitán's story crossed oceans. International news agencies picked it up. Stories appeared in magazines and broadcasts from Europe to North America to Asia. Viewers around the world were moved by the simple, pure devotion of a dog to his lost human friend. Letters poured into Villa Carlos Paz. Some sent donations for Capitán's care. Others sent letters of gratitude, expressing how his story had rekindled their faith in loyalty, love, and the enduring bond between humans and animals. Visitors began arriving from distant countries. Tourists, drawn not by grand monuments or famous architecture, but by the quiet power of a single dog's story. They stood in respectful silence near Miguel's grave, watching Capitán with reverence. Many took photographs, but others simply sat nearby, as if to share in the peace of his vigil. Some even left flowers not just for Miguel, but for Capitán himself, recognizing that he too had become a guardian of memory. Among the visitors were children, wide-eyed and curious. Their parents told them Capitán's story, and the children listened with wonder, their imaginations filled with images of brave, loyal dogs who never gave up on their loved ones. In this way, Capitán's story became a living legacy, passed from one generation to the next. But time, as it does, left its marks. Capitán's once glossy coat grew thinner and tinged with gray. His steps, once spry and eager, slowed with age. The climb up the gentle hill to Miguel's grave, which he had done so many times without hesitation, began to take longer. Still, he never failed to make the journey. Through aching joints and weary bones, he remained at his post, a faithful sentinel. The cemetery workers built him a sturdier shelter beside the grave, with warm blankets for cold nights. They made sure he had fresh water every day and plenty of food to sustain him. Veterinarians from nearby towns volunteered to check on his health, moved by his story and eager to ensure his comfort. Capitán accepted their care with quiet dignity. But no matter how well he was treated, it was clear that his heart remained anchored to the past, to the man he had loved, to the life they had shared. In his older years, Capitán began spending more time resting. He would lie with his head on his paws, eyes half closed, as if dreaming of days gone by. Perhaps, in those quiet moments, he saw Miguel's face once more. Perhaps he remembered their walks through town, the gentle scratch behind his ears, the sound of his master's laughter. No one could know for certain what filled Capitán's thoughts, but everyone who saw him felt the weight of his devotion. It was a love that needed no words, a loyalty that defied explanation, a story that touched even the coldest of hearts. As Capitán aged, many wondered what would happen when his time came to an end. Some hoped he might, at last, find peace, reunited with Miguel in whatever place lies beyond this life. Others believed he had already found that peace here on earth, by keeping his vigil. The Guzman family visited often. Their bond with Capitán deepened by shared grief and respect. They brushed his fur, spoke to him softly, and thanked him for keeping watch over their beloved Miguel. "You've been so good, Capitán," Damien would say, his voice thick with emotion. "So good." Capitán would lift his head at the sound, his eyes soft and knowing. It was as if he understood the gratitude in every word. Visitors continued to come. They brought not only food and blankets, but messages of love. Some left small wooden plaques with inscriptions like, "To Capitán, the bravest heart. True love never dies." Others knelt by his side and whispered prayers, not just for Miguel, but for the faithful guardian who had kept his promise through the long, lonely years. Capitán became more than a dog. He became a legend, a living testament to the depth of love and loyalty that can exist between two souls, no matter how different they may be. And though the world around him changed, though days grew shorter and winters colder, one thing remained constant. Night after night, as the sun set behind the hills of Villa Carlos Paz, Capitán curled up beside Miguel's grave, as he always had, watching, waiting, loving. As the years stretched into a decade, Capitán's once strong frame grew thin and frail. His powerful stride had slowed to a cautious shuffle, and the spark of youth in his eyes had softened into a quiet, knowing gaze. But no matter how heavy his bones felt, no matter how weary his muscles became, Capitán never abandoned his post. Each day, he rose from his makeshift shelter near Miguel's grave, shook off the dust of sleep, and carefully made his way to the headstone. There, he would lower himself onto the familiar patch of earth, rest his chin on his paws, and resume his silent vigil. The cemetery workers, now like family to him, noticed the changes with heavy hearts. They brought him extra blankets during the chilly months, laid his food closer so he wouldn't have to strain himself, and called in veterinarians to ease the aches of his aging body. Capitán accepted their care with quiet dignity, but it was clear to everyone who knew him. Capitán's journey was nearing its final steps. Word of Capitán's unwavering devotion continued to spread, and as he aged, even more visitors came to see the legendary dog who refused to leave his master's side. Some arrived with offerings, a soft pillow, a new bowl, or a gentle toy, as if to ease his twilight days. Books were written about his life, his tale told in classrooms as a lesson in loyalty and devotion. Filmmakers created documentaries that captured the beauty of his vigil, and social media carried his story to new generations. Wherever his name was spoken, it brought with it a sense of awe and wonder. Because Capitán had shown the world something simple, yet profound, that love does not die with the body, that loyalty knows no boundary of time or place, that even the humblest among us, a stray dog with a broken heart, can teach us the deepest truths of life. Today, in Villa Carlos Paz, Capitán's memory lives on. Visitors still come to the cemetery, some with flowers, others with quiet prayers. They pause before his resting place and reflect on the bond he shared with Miguel. They feel the weight of his story settle gently over them, like a soft cloak of remembrance. And as they walk away, many glance back one last time, as if expecting to see the faithful shepherd rising once more to resume his watch. And maybe, just maybe, in the quiet rustle of the trees, they do. The news of Capitán's passing spread quickly, carried on the wings of reporters and through the hearts of those who had followed his story. Messages of sorrow and gratitude poured in from around the world. "He taught us what it means to love unconditionally," wrote one admirer. "A hero, not in battle, but in loyalty," wrote another. Local news stations aired tributes to the faithful dog, and newspapers across Argentina published stories honoring his remarkable life. In Villa Carlos Paz, people gathered at the cemetery to pay their final respects. They brought flowers, candles, and handwritten notes, which they laid gently beside Miguel's grave, and at the spot where Capitán had slept for so many years. Children drew pictures of Capitán and placed them beneath the headstone, their crayons capturing his kind eyes and brave posture. Elderly couples held hands and wept quietly, touched by the depth of Capitán's devotion. He had become more than a symbol of loyalty. He had become a beacon of love, shining through the darkness of loss. The cemetery workers, deeply moved, held a small ceremony for Capitán. With care, they laid him to rest not far from Miguel's grave, so that even in death, the dog and his master would remain close. A simple marker was placed at the site, inscribed with words that captured the heart of his story. Capitán, loyal until the end. He kept watch over his master for 11 years, a true friend and guardian. Visitors to the cemetery now stopped at 2 graves, not just to remember Miguel, but to honor Capitán as well. They spoke his name with reverence, their voices full of respect. They shared his story with their children, ensuring that his legacy would never fade. And as they did, they felt the quiet presence of something greater than themselves, a reminder that love, once given freely, endures beyond life's end. In the years that followed, Capitán's story continued to inspire. Others came simply to sit beside him in respectful silence, absorbing the peaceful stillness that seemed to radiate from the dog who had become the soul of the cemetery. Children, wide-eyed and full of wonder, whispered to their parents, "Is he waiting for his owner to come back?" And the parents, with tears in their eyes, answered softly, "Maybe he is." But deep down, they knew Capitán had never truly believed Miguel would return. It wasn't hope that kept him there. It was love, pure, undying love. As the autumn of 2018 settled over Villa Carlos Paz, the air grew crisp and the days shortened. The leaves turned golden and drifted gently to the ground, carpeting the cemetery in a soft, rustling blanket. Capitán seemed to sense that his time was drawing to a close. His movements grew slower still, and he slept longer, often dozing beneath the pale sunlight with a serene expression on his face. Caretaker Hugo Martinez sat beside him often, stroking his weathered fur, speaking softly to him as he might to an old friend. "You've done well, Capitán," he whispered. "You've done more than anyone could ever ask." The Guzman family visited frequently, their hearts heavy with the knowledge that their faithful companion was nearing the end of his watch. Damien, now a grown man with lines of wisdom etched on his face, knelt by Capitán's side and brushed the dust from his coat. "Rest easy, old friend," he said, his voice catching. "You've kept your promise." One crisp evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, Capitán lay down beside Miguel's grave as he always had. The cemetery grew quiet. The wind whispered gently through the trees, and Capitán closed his eyes for the last time. There was no struggle, no fear, only peace. As if, at last, he had been reunited with the one he had waited for all these years.